Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Corporate Governance Committee. We will be going through each agenda item. It's lovely to have so many people around the table. Firstly, do we have any apologies?
Is there another microphone? Oh, sorry. Yes, Chair, we have apologies from councillors Hodgson, Jones and Jennings, and from Taryn Sakrani, the independent member, and Councillor Gray will be late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 1 is the minutes to approve the record of the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of May 2024. Any comments to be made before I sign those? Thank you very much. Item 2, members' interest. Do we have anybody wishing to disclose anything relating to any items on this evening's agenda? No, thank you. Item 3, an update on the Code of Conduct and Register of Disclosable Pecuniary Interests. This is a report from the Elections and Democratic Services Manager, but will be presented this evening by Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. The report is quite self-explanatory. It just lists where all the various parishes and towns are in terms of their submission of their DPIs, that's Disclosable Pecuniary Interest forms, also their adoption of Code of Conduct. So again, all tabulated. Happy to take any questions that any of the committee may have. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any comments or questions on that? Councillor Shaw.
This game again. Thank you. Yeah, not a question as such, just a comment. I was quite impressed. I mean, this is the first one I've seen of the. But I was quite impressed by the small number of missing declarations, and with 14s, it seemed like quite a decent figure. I don't know if that's due to the diligence of officers or simply the parishes being organised, but that's my only comment, really.
Thank you, Chair. I think you're absolutely right. It is reassuring to see we do have a large number of parishes and therefore a large number of town and parish councillors, and also there is flux. So again, often at town and parish there are changes in membership. So again, maintaining that is helpful. The Democratic Services team do issue regular reminders, gentle nudges, shall I say, and I think that does work. So, but thank you very much, and I will share that with Lisa as well. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
I'll apologise now for my voice, sorry. So in this report on section number 2, it says that this committee is responsible for maintaining high standards of conduct by members of the district and town and parish councils. Could you explain if a complaint is made against the council and the parish council, for instance, are we responsible for investigating that, or is it the actual the parish council itself?
Chair, with permission. So in terms of the complaints process, our protocol and also the national trend is to try and get the parish or town to sort it at local level in the first instance. That's the most effective. What we do on the basis not of something which is compelled, but because we are recognising we do try and assist parish and town councils, is if there is a concern with that look at or investigation, however it's deemed in the first instance, the complainant, for example, is not happy with the outcome, it can come on to us at a second level to have a further look to either say, no, that's a fair decision, or in limited circumstances say an investigation is merited and we'll take that forward. But there's quite a few factors to bear in mind there. The cost of these sort of things, public interest, various things. There's something called monitoring officer protocol, which sets it all out, which is on the external facing internet here, so worth having a look at.
Okay. Any more comments or questions? No? Okie doke, we will move on. So moving on to item 4, the annual report on compliance with the Information Rights Act. And this is going to be presented to us by Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, yeah, that works. So this is our annual report on the Information Rights Act. There's been a couple of changes to our systems this year, governance and systematically. We've introduced some new systems in terms of monitoring requests, as well as this is our first year reporting to a joint information and security governance board, which you'll note in sections 4. That has allowed us to update new guidance and policies, which is covered in 4.5, and it provides consistent policies across the entire 3C tenancy, which is Huntingdonshire District Council, South Cambs District Council and Cambridge City Council. And you'll note section 5 touches on some of the information security and compliance changes we've done in the past year or so, which was provided by our cybersecurity team here. Request performance in section 6. Again, we've had a changeover of systems halfway throughout the year here. Do want to highlight the data rights requests, 26 received, 14 within compliance within the time frame there. So although there are some that are outlaying, I do want to highlight the quality of those responses, which can be seen in the ICO complaints, where they have gone out and have gone to a regulator. The regulator has upheld the council's position, and that is the same also for freedom of information requests further down. 20 incidents reported throughout the year, and the vast majority of those being related to personal details inappropriately disclosed. You'll see a breakdown in 7.4 there on the categories of personal data incidents. Again, one of those 20 incidents was reported to the ICO as a serious incident. Our reporting system has changed within the year. We did have formerly a paper process for reporting breaches. We've tried to streamline that because of the 72-hour statutory deadline to report to the Information Commissioner's Office. Again, it also provides that higher level of visibility when there is a serious incident ongoing. We can see those. Of particular note, in 8.6, you'll see the figure. There's been a significant increase in the number of freedom of information requests this year, up 33%. This has mean in 8.7, you can see that the compliance is 81% against 83% to a target of 90%, which is set by the regulator. But that is in relation to those increased requests as well. And there is a breakdown of requests there, and as well the amount of information provided, whether we could provide those fully or they weren't able to be provided. 8.11, also touching again on the ICO complaints. Of the 5 requests that were escalated to the ICO, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, our independent regulator, all of the council's responses were upheld by the Information Commissioner's Office, which again shows that quality of response. And in section 9, we're just touching upon the steps we're looking forward to completing within the next year or so, identifying those gaps in data protection compliance and continuing to provide assurance against the accountability toolkit, which is led by the regulator.
Thank you. I will ask for comments and any questions, but I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, because this has given me a massive insight into an area that actually I know about, but from a council perspective, I have no questions because everything I wanted to ask, I turned the page and the answer was there. So from me, I just want to say thank you because it's a really, really good report, really thorough. Any other comments from anyone? Councillor Shaw.
I'll get my daft comment out of the way first. What's COO division in the cases per service pie chart?
It is the Chief Operating Officer division.
And if I may, So, I mean, I thought the data rights requests, the figures were quite poor, if I'm honest with you. They sort of almost a 50% within the relevant time frame. I noticed for the FOI requests we have a 90% target. Do we have a target for the data rights requests?
There's no set target for the data rights requests. As the FOI request is set by the regulator at 90%, they haven't set us a data rights request within their approach to regulation currently. There is scope to set an internal one there.
And is there any like lessons learned from that? So obviously, is there a plan to improve these figures or like implement anything to improve the figures?
Absolutely. I don't think it's a case of one lesson learned. We've had a bit of a deeper dive on some of those requests and the challenges we face, particularly working within a local authority, is the somewhat federated nature of data. An individual interacts with the council in a multitude of ways, whether that's through the council tax service or some of the other services that they may use. Those are all within separate systems, and it's not a one person jumping into the system and responding. It's 15 people jumping into 15 separate systems. And when we looked into the data a little bit more, we'd provide some of the answers within those, but there were hold-ups within others, and we wouldn't report a partially completed response. We closed the request when the response has gone out fully, and focusing on that quality of accountability. We can't record data to say, yes, we got 50%, because it then becomes something rather difficult to report on and provide accountability and transparency on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? No. Thank you, Adam. That's really, really, really lovely report to read. Item 5, review of fraud investigation activity. This is a report from the Revenues and Benefits Manager, and we have Katie here this evening to present it.
Good evening. So this report is a summary of the activity undertaken by the Council's corporate fraud team over the period 23-24, and it's a requirement of the Council's anti-fraud and corruption strategy that we report this every year to the Corporate Governance Committee. There were 3 main areas of focus for the team. That's reviewing output from the National Fraud Initiative, which is a national data matching exercise. Investigating ad hoc referrals coming to the team from the general public, from other services and sometimes from members, and activity undertaken in line with an initiative working with other councils across Cambridgeshire, looking at detecting and preventing fraud in the tax base. You'll see that the results that have been achieved in point 3.8 this year are really positive. £110,000 is being recovered from council tax discounts, so that includes single person discount that's been claimed incorrectly. The initiative with the other Cambridgeshire councils has generated £90,000 worth of savings there as well. And we've also managed to recover nearly £53,000 worth of benefits, so local council tax support and housing benefit through the activity of the fraud team. One of the bits that's difficult to put a value on is around tenancy fraud though. And while we don't have our own housing stock, we work really closely with other housing organisations to help them. And through that activity over the last year, we managed to recover 9 properties, which really does help make sure that resource is there for people in need. The focus for, just one more bit, for last year, we've recently had a inspection on our use of investigatory powers. So something to note there. So an organisation called IPCO, which is the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, will come and inspect our use of surveillance activity across the council. We had that inspection a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be bringing the report back to the Corporate Governance Committee in due course, so you can just see how we're doing with that activity there as well. I think for next year, our plan at the moment, or the current year, is very much still focused on the National Fraud Initiative. We've got new data to be uploaded in the autumn this year. It's a biannual exercise, so the data that we're working on currently is getting rather out of date, so that data will be with us by the end of the year. And we've also got plans underway to develop further this working relationship that we have with Cambridgeshire County Council and the other districts to make sure that we have got a really robust mechanism for preventing and detecting fraud across Cambridgeshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Do we have any comments or questions on this report? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I'm really pleased about the 9 properties. That's one of my bugbears, empty homes and also people are not inappropriately homed. I've one question is on 3.13. It says that there was no relevant activity report for surveillance cameras for fly tipping example. Are we to assume from that then that fly tipping is not a problem anymore, or is it just not being investigated as much?
So I wouldn't say it's not a problem as such, and there is activity carried on in that area, but it depends on when we actually need to invoke those powers to put cameras in place. So there is a formal process that we need to seek permission, and so the those regulation of investigatory powers and those surveillance cameras are limited to that specific activity rather than any other activity in relation to fly tipping.
Perhaps if I can just add to that as well. Again, it is that reference to the regulatory, which is the covert, which then if you're hiding, so you're not in plain sight effectively, so you might have a hidden camera because of the test around what is deemed to be the right to privacy. That's why you go through what is the RIPA authorisation process, which is the Regulatory Investigatory Powers Act authorisation. However, investigation does take place, and often we can use overt surveillance where we tell people that we're going to watch. And because you tell people, you don't have to go through the RIPA authorisation because you're not being covert, you're being overt. But Katie referenced the IPCO report, which we've recently just received, and actually that was a really useful useful investigation. A useful review into how we use our powers. So one of the actions on the audit updates was around the corporate enforcement policy. But one of the things we're wanting to do using the IPCO recommendations is use that to now update our corporate enforcement policy, and that will kickstart that piece of work as well.
Any final questions or comments? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll agree with everybody else. It's a good report and some good results in there. Section 4.1 mentions the corporate fraud manager retired in December and the post is now vacant. Presumably, could that not have been foreseen and then some sort of recruiting process or at least the exploration work could be done prior to their departure? I'm just wondering why we left it until they'd physically left before investigating what we could do after they've left, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So we were aware that they were going to retire prior to the date they did leave. And we did start that work well before then as well. We have been talking in depth with a different organisation about working more closely together. And even at the point of retirement, we thought that would be a good option for us, and it's taken some time to work through the detail. As we've done that, it has become more and more complex, certainly with issues around information governance and how we control access to our data. It's just become more complex, and we've reached a point recently where we've gone, actually, that might not be the right option for us. So we have now gone out to recruit, and that advert went out yesterday.
Thank you. We're going to move on then to item 6, the external audit plan for 24 to 25. No? That's not what it says here. Correct it.
Good evening, everyone. The draft statement of accounts were published by the statutory deadline of the 31st of May, and the audit of these is currently planned to start on the 9th of September. To this end, it's my pleasure to introduce Claire Mellons and Julia Cam of Ernst Young to talk you through the external audit plan for 23-24 and to take any questions.
Thank you, Sharon. I don't intend to go through the whole 53 pages in great detail, you'll be pleased to know, but what I'll do is I'll go through the executive summary, which draws out the key points of our audit strategy, and then happy to take any questions on any other parts of the report from members. The first couple of pages are really set in the context of the report and that we're working in. And you'll remember at the last committee, Mark Hodgson came and gave a bit of an update on the reset of local audit. Clearly, we have a new government in place now. It's very early days. And at the minute, we're kind of working on the strategy that we communicated to you when we were last here at the end of May. So our strategy hasn't changed. We are still fully intending to have the 23-24 report finished and reported to you by the end of this calendar year, accepting that dates may change. We may not be able to put pen to paper, but the audit process should be finished and reported by the end of this calendar year. On probably the key part of the report is page 7, which is the risk dashboard. And in here, these sets out the key areas of audit focus for our 23-24 audit. And we have highlighted kind of how they've changed from 21-22, which was the last fully audited set of financial statements that we did for the authority. So the misstatement due to fraud and error, we're absolutely not saying that we think there's a higher level of risk here for the committee. This is a risk that we're required to consider on every audit by audit and standards. And we do have some mandatory procedures that we'll need to perform around assessing your use of estimates, considering any unusual transactions in the accounts, and particularly looking at journal entries posted by management. But that is a risk set out in audit and standards. Similarly, the one underneath in terms of revenue and expenditure recognition, that again is something that we're required to consider on every audit. Audit and standards require us to consider revenue, but that's been adapted for the public sector because public sector bodies are usually net spending institutions to cover expenditure recognition as well. We've been through quite a detailed process of assessing that and thinking about the risks, and where we've assessed the risks most likely to occur is through the inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure, because that would kind of remove the expenditure impact in year and would allow it to be smoothed out across a medium-term period. And that is again consistent with the approach that we took in 21-22. The area where there has been a slight increase in risk is around the valuation of land and buildings. So we've increased that risk to significant for 23-24, and that is largely triggered due to a change in external valuer. As part of our risk assessment processes, we have what we call as a trigger list, and if an entity changes valuer, we always look into that a bit more closely in the first year. So that's the rationale for that one tripping up into a significant risk. And, you know, similar to every year, the pensions liability is a huge number in the council's balance sheet. There are so many assumptions and judgments, so many calculations involved that we'll always look at that quite carefully and use our own actuarial experts to have a look at the assumptions used by management's expert. At the bottom, we have the sentence that refers to the consultation and the planned measures to address local audit delays. So we will be doing some work on the rebuilding of assurance to make up for the potentially disclaimed year. We're working through that as a firm now with guidance hoping to be issued by the end of July. So we'll be able to talk that through in detail with Sharon about what additional work we might want to do as part of the 23-24 audit to try and remove any disclaimer as quickly as possible. But again, that's still under development. So we will update the committee if there's any major change in risk or focus. Page 8 sets out materiality levels, and again, hopefully they're fairly consistent to what you're used to seeing. We do caveat that depending on the outcomes of the consultations, we may revisit those, but it's normal in any audit process that we would revisit materiality at various points. So again, that's not necessarily a change in strategy. And I think, to be honest, that is probably all that I wanted to pull out. Perhaps around value for money. So our initial value for money work, we're pleased to know, hasn't identified any significant risks of weakness in the council's arrangements. But again, that's something that we continue to review as we work through the audit. So happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions, comments? Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being slightly late to the party. Claire, welcome back. Thank you very much. Just three things from me, if I may. So could you just perhaps go in a little bit more detail? Page 7 is elaborated on page 15 when you talk about the significant risk with regards to valuations. Is the focus on the council's what I would call legacy estate, which is you call it PPE, as opposed to the investment estate? Sorry.
So it's actually on both. So we'll focus on the land and buildings and any investment property as well. So we'll focus on both areas.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an ongoing, for those who are newer around this table, valuations seem to be such a problem, not for the council itself, but in terms of just getting people to do it, getting them to do it in a timely fashion and getting them to do it in a way that accords with what you want. So I think it's right to flag that up, Chair, and we need to keep a close eye on that. And Sharon, have we commissioned someone to actually do this?
Yeah, we're in contract with Wilkes Head Eve for 3 years, so we've got 1 year left on that contract.
My second question, they're not too complicated. Value for money, it was reassuring to hear you say that there's no initial concerns. When we look on page 19 at the level of detail that you go into with regards to demonstrating value for money on behalf of the NAO, it's a very comprehensive list of things that you look at. How do you work out, because you can't look at everything, so how have you gone about working out what you are going to look at in order to assure yourself of where we are?
Yeah, so there are, you're right, the NEO guidance is very broad and doesn't drive us down a particular route other than the three criteria. We do have a standardised work programme that's been approved, which consider, so each team across EY will consider the same points. We will take into account very much the assessment of the entity level controls that we've done as part of the planning for the audit. We'll take into account things like, the discussions we've had at committee meetings. So we talked about when we talked about internal audit last week, that's something last month that will feed in. We'll look at risk registers to see if there's anything in there. We'll review all kinds of minutes. We'll speak to management. We'll speak to internal audit. And really, it often comes back to that stand-back assessment about does everything make sense? And we also talk quite regularly through the main audit season as a partner group to make sure that we're being consistent as well. So I'm not taking a judgment on something that is different to, for example, Mark further down the road on a very similar matter. So there's a lot of check and challenge in there as well throughout the firm to make sure that we're all coming up with a consistent view wherever possible.
And then my final question, which won't surprise you really, page 38, your fee schedule seems to have an awful lot of TBCs sitting in there. It sounds like I might have stolen somebody's thunder there, but so we appreciate that this is a plan, it's the beginning of a process, but can you give us some assurance as to when the blanks get kind of filled in?
Yes, that's right. So I'm aware, obviously, that there's been quite a significant increase in your scale fee compared to the last audit. And the intention for that was intentional through the negotiations with PSAA. So what we're hoping is that a lot of this work will be baked into the scale fee, and there'd been some kind of uplifts for changes in audit and standards in previous years, where we potentially charge scale fee variations where we haven't here. The one known scale fee variation that wasn't built into the PSAA process, which we've highlighted here, is around the revision of ISA 315, the new ISA 315, and that requires us to do some additional procedures around the risk assessment, and in particular looks at the IT systems that are being used by the council and the controls in place around those. And the reason that that's not built into the base fee is purely that when we were pricing these up, we hadn't actually done it was a very new standard. We hadn't actually done the work anywhere. We will track it. So I think I committed at the last audit committee meeting that where these things think we're going potentially might gain a variation, we will track the hours so that we can be communicating to management really very early about anything where we think there may be a potential scope variation. But other than ISA 315, I can't think of anything right now that would trigger a variation to that amount.
Councillor Taylor, did you have a question, or has it already been asked?
Councillor Gray did steal my thunder on one part. That was the TBC thing. I thought it was a bit odd. Anyway, no, I do have a question, and it's just from my perspective. It's like because I work in the NHS, PPE for me is personal protective equipment, and I'm sure the council used to have aprons and masks and personal protective equipment. So your test of the property, plant and equipment of PPE, it's very confusing. Is that an industry standard explanation of it, PPE?
It is, yes. So that is commonly how we refer to it. Is property, plant and equipment. I also audit a lot of NHS and get confused when they start referring to it in the context that you do, because I'm used to it in this way. But I mean, we can maybe think about that and refer to it as land and buildings, because actually the valuation risk is attached to your land and buildings, your investment property. It's not to kind of the other bits of fixtures and fittings in there. So I think we can probably reflect on that for future reports and make it a bit less confusing.
Any final comments? No? Lovely. Thank you, Claire. Moving on to item 7, the internal audit peer review challenge actions update. So this is an update on the peer review from Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. And so just to be clear, this is the audit peer review, not the corporate peer challenge. And just for completeness, I'm expecting that report, the final version of the corporate peer challenge, to either come through tonight or tomorrow morning, which is why, just for clarity, it's not at scrutiny tomorrow, because I have not yet received it, in case some of you are wondering where it is. Turning to the audit peer review, if I can take you through the various pages. So if we go to page 95 of the agenda, obviously we're looking at those that are complete there, and we get to page 99, which has the first amber on there. This one relates to recommendation 10, which was around the risk register. I should have perhaps said at the beginning of this item, our new internal audit manager started with us yesterday, Yasir Khan. We were really pleased with the recruitment process, and we were really pleased that Yasir was able to join us so promptly. And he's already looking at some of the actions that remain outstanding on this side, on this particular report, and also the following report as well in terms of internal audit actions. It's fair to say that his feedback to me already has been that he is impressed with our risk officer. I know that when we first carried out this peer review, our officer was new in post, and there was some concern about her experience, but Yasir has confirmed that he has found our risk officer to be informed and very active in terms of how she is managing the risk register and indeed the culture. I think it's also worth reflecting as well that we remain closely aligned to resources for this. And again, I wanted our new internal audit manager to start and be able to give a fresh perspective. And indeed, talking of recruitment, we also have Suzanne Jones, our new 151 officer, joining us on the 2nd of October. I think I have mentioned, certainly in the employment committee, it would be remiss of me not to hear that actually we were able to recruit very speedily to that particular post, with Karen really supporting and giving me early notice of her intention to retire, picking up the point you made around the previous fraud manager. And being able to do that means that we've got, for a Section 151 officer, in terms of seniority, a gap of 3 months is actually quite impressive in terms of continuity. Suzanne is already in dialogue with us as well, and is starting to attend meetings for that continuity. So I think it's helpful just to have that in the context that this is not a standalone item pending different people joining, we retain review of that. So again, just to though it's amber, it is ongoing, it's being actively managed. If I can then turn to the next page, page 100. So you'll see one of, and I'm looking at recommendation 13 here. We now received the report by BDO, which was the external quality assurance of our internal audit function. That is now sitting with us at management, and again, something that I've asked Yasir to give comments on, and we will be coming to you at the September Corporate Governance Committee with the action plan arising from that piece of work. Having now completed that piece of work and the action plan as work in progress, that also means that recommendation 14 and indeed 15 are now going to be able to start to have some timescales added to those. So I think that's, again, a key piece of work that we've been waiting on, and it has now landed. That takes us on to the new recommendations. That completes the recommendations 16, 17, as you can see are green. That took us on to the new recommendations from the update peer review of the audit function when they came back and saw us on the 28th of February earlier this year. And again, just to go through those, recommendation 1 is still amber because the 17 recommendations are not complete in their entirety. However, you can see that recommendations 2 is now complete. 3 relates to the monitoring officer capacity issue. That sits with me, and it's something that Tom, our current monitoring officer, and I have discussed at length. I'm waiting for the final report from the Corporate Peer Challenge, which also has a recommendation linked to capacity around the monitoring officer function. So that will be something that you'll be able to see come through there later in this year. And that's something we have been talking about quite significantly in other areas where that will impact in a positive way as well. Recommendation 4 relates to terms of reference. Those have actually been approved by Council on the 22nd of May. Again, back to a smaller cohort of committee members here as a result. Small but perfectly formed, we perhaps should say. But also some of the training that was scheduled to take place during the election period has been postponed, and that is now scheduled, has been rescheduled till September, I believe the date is, in order to accommodate commitments that arose during that period. With regard to recommendation 5, again, they're subject to the capacity coming in through the monitoring officer as well. I think that takes the recommendations to completion there in terms of updates, and I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chair.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Gray.
Well, probably a reflection, really. Just to thank you for the report. I think it's very fulsome. It's easy to navigate. There's quite a lot of action going on, and I think that's the point I think it would be worth us noting around this table that, Michelle, you and your team have clearly got the bit between your teeth in terms of what you want to do and how you want to go. I just would encourage you, certainly on this side of the table, to keep going at it. There's still some outstanding bits that need to be, as you've highlighted, completed, but I think good progress and worth noting, I think, Chair.
Absolutely. Very, very good point to make. Any other comments before we move on? Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. Very comprehensive report. I just wanted to pick up on the training that had been rescheduled for September and the KPIs that you will be looking at. Because that, I think, is based on the skills audit, is it?
Oh, yeah, yes, it is. Following the effectively a skills gap analysis of the skills audit that the previous members of the committee undertook, which also form members of this smaller committee, we looked at where those skills gaps were, and the training is aligned to that. I think it's also, I should reflect that SLT undertook that skills gap analysis as well. so that we could also identify if there were any training that was required for officers as well, because as I often say, training is for all of us, not just for officers or members. It should be for all of us in order to ensure that we're operating at our best capacity.
Councillor Shaw.
Possibly slightly off-piste, and you may have mentioned it slightly. Who's covering the Section 151 officers' duties for the 3 months that the post is vacant?
The very happy Sharon. Yes, we've got, and I think it's worth noting, we have, with the gap of 3 months, we have allocated those resources. So Sharon is acting up into the 151 role. And thank you, Sharon, doing a sterling job already. No pressure to continue. But in fact, and we've shared some of those responsibilities out. So as an example, Nikki in HR is reporting directly into me, as is Yassir in the interim. Ollie, I can't remember who is reporting into Ollie now. But we have shared between Ollie, Mike, John and I, we have shared those reporting lines. Oh, and Lisa is reporting into me.
Thank you very much. We will move on to agenda item 8. This is the implementation of internal audit actions. And again, I'm going to hand over to Michelle.
Too quick. Thank you very much, Chair. This is one of those reports, I think, Jonathan, this was on my very first Corporate Governance Committee, was a challenge to me around the number of outstanding audit actions. And whilst work has been progressing, one of the things I have tasked Yassir with is to review the outstanding actions and to come up with a more efficient way of capturing progress. Because I know there is progress, which I'll give a couple of examples, which has progressed in respect of these items, but isn't actually being contained within the report. So, it's not as I would want you to see it, because as I can say, there's still matters here that are requiring an update. But I think it's helpful with Yassir's background, his approach, and how he's already, again, very quick progress in a matter of literally 2 days. And that's what I've tasked him to do. He's already had a look at the outstanding actions for me. And if I give you a couple of examples, the corporate enforcement policy I referenced earlier on, that has an outstanding action date from the 1st of January. There have been things since that time that have meant that the policy, the implementation of the review of that policy has been delayed. It would be helpful for us to capture that for you so you can see what's happening in the background. And one of those examples is of the IPCO inspection. So again, just for clarity, that is the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. We knew, because of the services that touched on, so that touched an example, Katie in Revs and Bends, it touched on envirocrime, it touches on licensing, planning enforcement, that whole range of enforcement activity that would be helpful to understand any feedback that came through that inspection, and as part of the recommendations that come through that, to implement and reference those in that corporate enforcement policy review. It would have been helpful had we shared with you, and again, I'm quite happy to take that on board, shared that with you before tonight, that was why there was a delay in implementation. So I think it's just something around the system isn't working at the moment. We need to be a bit more agile in terms of how we provide updates. The other example, if I may also give, is around, as an example, the commensurate review of Section 106 priorities and processes. Work has been going on in the background there, but it means it's not complete, but progress is being made. And as part of the corporate peer challenge, one of the suggestions was that we move to a peer review of our planning function, which is all booked in for September. So again, it would make very practical sense to wait for that peer review to take place and reflect on any recommendations that are made before that action is complete. It may also mean that that action, the recommendation itself, might not be as valid as it was at the time it was first issued. So the other thing I've asked Yassir to consider is working with the individual teams. Are those recommendations still relevant in terms of what the issue was that we were seeking to address at the time the internal audit took place, because sometimes things move on and aren't necessarily captured through that recommendation, and that needs to be a proper review back to you as Corporate and Governance Committee, so you can see where that thinking has moved along and it isn't just a snapshot of a time several months ago. I'm more than happy to take questions.
Do we have Councillor Shaw?
Action reference 1669, which is the S106 one you just mentioned, mentions a vacant programme manager. Are we actively recruiting for that?
I'm going to confess, I can't actually remember where we are with the recruitment on that one, simply because it might not be that, again, that might not be the post that we actually need. So I think there may have been a pause in respect of that. We have actually, on a broader scale in terms of planning, just actually completed a really successful campaign, which culminated today. We had our induction, our quarterly induction, and I think we had 4 new planning officers in that induction out of about 20, 25 new starters. So again, planning has always historically suffered with a recruitment challenge. And it was something that was reported to Employment Committee last week. I'm trying to think when we had Employment Committee last week. And we tried something different in terms of how we recruit. So we did a video, actually, that had our members of staff talking about why this is a great place to come and work, the variation and the interest, and hearing from team members. And we went out with several posts then, and we recruited to all of those that we went out to advert. The time they hand the notice in and start, they are all in post now. So I will follow that up and share with you. And in fact, I'll ask Mike to just update CGC where we are with that. But I can't properly recall where we are, but it might be one that we're holding dependent now on the peer review in September for planning.
I'm happy for you to bring that back to the next meeting or say just put an update out. That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
If members are happy for an email, I'm sure Mike won't mind emailing you with that information.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. Sorry. It's going, the voice. So one of my observations, and was actually a question about the corporate enforcement policy. I've put down here who is writing it. So I presume it's the audit manager who's writing it. Is that what you're talking about? Somebody else?
It wouldn't be the internal audit manager that would be writing the corporate enforcement policy. It will be, I was going to look at Tom then, but it will be a combination of those key officers. John Taylor is the lead on that in terms of his service areas, but it will be a very much a best practice, what's happening elsewhere. How do we align all of those teams that actually have enforcement as part of their functionality to ensure we have a consistent approach, both in the public interest test in terms of whether we progress to formal prosecution, but also aligning good practice that's happening elsewhere. And also one of the things that we spoke about with the IPCO feedback, or certainly during the IPCO meeting with the external investigator, I should say, was how we share good practice. And I think it's really important that when several of our teams are actively involved in enforcement, that we share that good practice, we share what works well and what doesn't. Because ultimately, Tom and I would say this is a pair of lawyers, one practicing, one not. It's important that you all have that collective understanding of what is the nature of the offence, and therefore what is it you're trying to prove, and then how is that enshrined in a very generic policy in terms of good practice, because it shouldn't matter which service area you're in. Good practice around enforcement should be consistent, whether it be council tax, whether it would be planning, whether it would be environmental health. So there's something around why we need to be doing more collectively as opposed to individual teams, and then enshrining a more collegiate approach across the teams once that policy has come into effect. and that I would also expect members to be involved in that as well. It's part of a policy formation in terms of see what you see out and about as well.
So as it was referenced, I actually took the time to actually go through the actual current policy. And right at the end of it, it says that it should be reviewed after 5 years, but doesn't give it a start date. So could we see on future that the policies that are in force or that are put in place, that there is a date on it so that we can see when it is due to be reviewed again? And because it's very hard to actually find out that information.
It's a very well made point, and it's one we've acknowledged as well. We have other policies that actually across the council and perhaps aren't clear when their review dates are there, and it's something that we're working with our colleagues in Dem Services to diary in so that we know where they are on the meeting agendas actually for when they've got to go back, so we can backfill and programme in that work. I'm not saying it will be perfect firsthand, but again, it's something we're very alive to in terms of that transparency.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's an excellent point by Councillor Taylor about version control and, just a front sheet that's standard across everything, because one of the points I was going to make actually is that when you flick through these things, they kind of, the formatting sort of jumps around a bit because different officers are doing different things. So the appendix here doesn't have any page numbers on it. So it's helpful that they've got action references, but there aren't any page numbers on there. But I think the one point that I wanted to make is, without wishing to sound incredibly collegiate and not throwing too much challenge into the mix this evening, is well done, going in the right direction. I think it's absolutely right that the new internal audit manager coming in takes a fresh look at this. I think that's the right thing to do. I do hope that the temptation is sometimes to think, well, I'm not entirely sure why that's on there, and just kind of bin it. And I very much hope that I can see you're going to say that's not going to happen, because it was there for a purpose. And I think the key is, what was the purpose? Yes, I accept it may have moved on, but I think it's good that we get a fresh pair of eyes over the top of all of this, and bring that forward through to one of our future meetings.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, I think the practical thing as well, if I may say, trying to manage numbers that were in 1,709, there has to be a more efficient way on an annual basis that we can manage new actions, but still manage the previous actions that have been completed. Otherwise, before we know it, will be in the tens of thousands. And I think the practical point around page numbers is well made. I think one of the things perhaps is we could make them highlighted in bold more. They're along the side, but again, when you're looking at them landscape, no, it's fine, but it's where you look at them landscape, and again, do you know what, Claire? Sorry, I had a moment of trying to age-related memory loss there. When Claire was referring to her page numbers earlier on, you were referring to your report page numbers as opposed to the agenda page numbers, and it can get awfully confusing when there's lots on the agendas. So I think that's a practical point that we do need to always assess how we can make that easy for reference, particularly when you're looking online. I've gone old school and got hard copies, but even then it's confusing to watch them. And may I say, Councillor Gray, absolutely not. It's not an intention to chuck out the recommendations that are there at the moment. I think if any do need to be amended, updated or removed, there is an explanation to Corporate Governance Committee as to why, so you can see the thought process behind that and debate it and push back if you're not in agreement. Quite properly. So I think that's helpful for Councillor Gray to just remind us all that isn't just a fresh pair of eyes and out with the old, in with the new. There is continuity that is important.
Any final comments? No? Well, we will move on to agenda item 9, the Corporate Risk Register update. And this is to consider the report from the Director of Finance and Corporate Resources. I'm going to hand over to Michelle and Oliver on this one.
This one's actually going to me, Chair. So one of the two areas I've inherited in the interim following Karen Sutton's departure is corporate risk. The other is procurement. So some of you might know Matilda Ansong, who's our risk officer. And what you've got in front of you here today is a refreshed risk register in line with the new risk strategy, which you approved in September last year. I think it's fair to note at this stage that the transition from Karen to myself has left a couple of gaps in the risk register, which I'll draw your attention to. So what you have in front of you is the refreshed corporate risk register, which has been the subject of substantial work following the approval of the new risk strategy last year, and the corporate heat map, which basically maps those against likelihood and impact to give you a sort of greater sense of impact. The area where there's a little work to do is the service risks updated over the last 3 months, which has the inherent risks mapped out, but not the residual risks appropriately scored. Now, what I would sort of indicate to the committee is, for me, that's a sign of progress. So one of the things that Matilda has been doing, very diligently, is we talked to you last year about the refresh of the service planning process and making risk more core to that. The refreshed risks that you have in front of you are things that grew out of the process this year. And obviously the 3 key steps of risk management being risk identification, the issue around the quantification of that, and then treatment. So Matilda has been going out. She spent a lot of time with the operations team, which is what's generated some of these. I was in those meetings with her. She's done the same with One Leisure, making sure that all appropriate risks are identified. We're then quantifying those appropriately and dealing with the treatment plans in relation to those. That's a rolling program going through the organisation. So the next time you see those, you will have the residual risk scores against all of those operational risks that are highlighted there. When you look across the overall risk register, what you see is it's only those new risks where we are lacking that residual score overall. But at that point, Chair, I'll hand back to you and happily take any questions on the overall register.
Anybody want to raise any points? Councillor Gray.
I want to give my colleagues over there an opportunity to me not to steal their thunder. So Ollie, risk movement report, and I know these things are always very difficult to. There's a score of different ways that you can bring them to life, so to speak, and we've chosen one here. I think it's the second of the appendices. The lines. Are the lines going? Are they sort of saying that they've moved from the end of the line to where the blob is, or from where the blob is to the end of the line?
So I appreciate it's hard to interpret. What it's showing is the end of the line without a circle on is the starting point. So that was where the inherent risk started. Where the circle ends is the residual risk that is then left after the treatments that we have in place for that risk are in place. I think teeing up my colleague here, Jamie, for the item that's coming up next on cyber securities, as you will fully appreciate, particularly given your professional expertise, is in some areas there is only so much mitigation you can put in place for some of the risks that we face, and that's where some don't move so much.
So then just turning to the circles, I understand why the general election, fresh in our minds, might not yet be, the residual risk might not be scored, but 14 and 15 are white on the blobs, but they're not white on the, they're not white down on the actual breakdown of it. Is it, am I missing something there, or?
And those are risks that come under that category that I described, which is they've got an inherent risk, but not a residual risk. At the moment, if you scroll down, you look at a 14, 15, there is no residual risk in that category. So in effect, they've got no line to move along because there's no residual risk score currently in the system. When we address that next time, the colour will change, and what you'll see is the assessment of the residual risk colouring that category. So, for instance, on 14, you've got a risk of 9 as the inherent risk. If the residual risk was 9 as well, and that was put into the system, that circle would show up as orange.
Am I looking at what everybody else is looking, which is that they are orange in the actual detail? Whereas the general election is white. That's the thing that's confusing me. This is, well, it's the second page after the page 3 of 3 on that. There, you've got a white one on grid reference 367, and then 13 and 14 is.
So can we go back to the previous discussion around page numbers? Is this page 132 of 180? Can I suggest I take this offline and come back to you? So I think the issue is in relation to it not having a residual risk score is the thing that's driving it. But let me review that and come back to you. I'll come around afterwards and sit down with you.
Yeah, of course, Tom.
Possibly, and this is with a following wind, because obviously numbers and this type of thing aren't quite my area. But looking at the page numbering, we have page 128 of 180, and then we go on to the risk movement report, which is on the next page in the pack. Now, in the risk movement report, at 3, we have the white box, the second box, absolutely. If you then go down to 14 and 15, these are coloured orange on the table, but in the preceding circle and line schematic, they are blank. I think that's the point, isn't it?
Indeed.
We will have an answer, so that's good. Anything from anyone else before we move on? No? Okay. Item 10 then, annual report of the Corporate Governance Committee. This is to consider the annual report to Council in respect of the year ending March 2024 on the work that has been undertaken. And this is page 145 to 156. Is anybody wishing to make comment on anything? Michelle?
It might be helpful just to remind committee. So this report has been prepared by the previous chair, Councillor Wells. When we go, it is going to full council next week, where Michael, you will, as the chair, present that. It is a report that's been prepared by the previous chair, and I'm aware that Karen, our former 151 officer, was very clear that this was not her report. This was a matter for the chair to produce. So again, just to be transparent, this isn't something that someone has written and presented to the previous chair, and therefore, again, I'm sure the chair will also add to council next week. But if there was any comments that you might wish to make tonight, that again could perhaps our current chair could then pick up with the previous chair, so it's joined up for council next week.
Any thoughts? Councillor Taylor? No? Nope. Yeah, it certainly is comprehensive. Quite pleased with that. Good, good. Right. We will move on. Item 11, the Corporate Governance Committee Progress Report. This is to receive the Corporate Governance Committee Progress Report, pages 157 to 160. This is where you wanted to just comment on those items.
Chair, hopefully this has been updated in light of what was said at the last meeting. So the first item is on there for a matter of process, in that Karen reported that the waiver has been in place for some time. So I'd mark that as yes, that can be deleted. The next one, the Constitution Review Working Group will hold its first meeting. I think it's on the 18th of July. So hopefully that can come off the report. The Corporate Risk Register, similarly, is on the agenda this time. The Internal Audit Progress Report, so this refers to the... Yes, the debt management policy. That was something that Karen didn't get a chance to complete before she left, and she's now got, or there are now provisions in place to produce a new policy, so that can stay on there for now. The unaudited statement of accounts. So there was a wider point raised about monitoring the pension fund. I think Sharon might be able to contribute here, but I think the point was that it's going to be difficult to get data from other pension funds because they just don't publish that data. So the only comparator authorities we would have would be the Cambridgeshire authorities, and we know what that performance is. So I don't know if there's a view on that point. Do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, Tony, I was just trying to be clear about what you just said there, that we wouldn't be able to look at pension deficits and surpluses beyond Cambridgeshire.
Is that something Sharon could come in on?
I think we're just unsure as to whether or not the pension scheme actuaries would be willing to share that information. The audit, do you know whether or not they would be?
Probably not. I think they would be specific to your body rather than sharing other information.
So I'm looking at Councillor Taylor here. I think because clearly in the audit, in the accounts, it's going to show whether there's a surplus or a deficit, isn't there? So I think there was a suggestion that, given that everybody has got audited, published accounts, that's what the committee wanted to look at, to sort of see what does it look like elsewhere. Have we got a worse situation or a better situation? Where do we sit in the galaxy of local authorities? So I don't think it's any suggestion that we're going to be crawling into the detail of people's accounts, because obviously that's being done through the audit process that's going on in every single authority. It was just to try and benchmark ourselves against other authorities, and that doesn't just include Cambridgeshire. Now, Michelle, you may have a view on, clearly a London borough may not be an appropriate thing to benchmark ourselves against, but we clearly do have other sort of peers, if you like, within local government that we could do that with. That's my recollection of the debate or the concern that was brought out.
I mean, Sharon, if I ask a question of sorry, Chair, if I may, picking up Councillor Gray's point there in terms of information that would already be in the public domain by virtue of published accounts, my question would be: is there a way? Is that published separately elsewhere? Is there like I don't like the phrase a league table because that's never helpful. But is there and again, I'll look to Claire as well. Are you aware of whether there is something that's already published? Because I think that's where it's the resource. So if it meant that the finance team have got to trawl other published accounts, there is, I suppose, a question of resources, and therefore we would need to reflect, is it worth just looking at our local audit family of councils and take that as a minimum of comparison of what they've published? And at least that would pick up Councillor Gray's point, not helpful to compare us with a London borough. Or is there something, again, if it isn't public, because I'm not sure it would be a good use of resources of Sharon's team to look for 360 odd councils. So that would be my, if there isn't a league table, for want of a better expression, then it would probably be just to focus on our audit family, but perhaps Claire or Sharon would be able to assist there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did you want to come in, Claire?
Yeah, just thinking off the top of my head, I think it would be quite difficult to do a comparison because your number in your accounts is based on your kind of membership data as well, and the number of active and deferred pensioners. And so every local authority that has a share of a local government pension scheme, that is going to differ between bodies. So I'm not sure that from the public information you would ever get a directly comparable number.
Okay. Sharon, did you want to come in?
Quite possibly is a good point to make, is I think the majority of local authority pension schemes did go into surplus last year. It's been a slight turnaround this year, but
Mr. Chairman, to assist. So, conscious it may have been a couple of meetings ago when this was debated. In terms of the purpose that you were seeking the information to compare, I'm going to look to Councillor Gray as well. Was it that you wanted to assess whether our liability was any worse or better and how we might mitigate? Because again, the ability to mitigate is also quite limited as well, because it is difficult to mitigate. We manage pension strain in terms of when we have requests to leave, through normal processing. But I'm not sure how much we could actually mitigate. Again, we're looking at Sharon there. But again, it would be probably helpful to understand what was it you were seeking to achieve, and perhaps we can take that as an action point. That if we can't do it in that way, perhaps we can look at a different type of information that might still assist in what you were seeking to achieve from that question.
I'm happy to try and answer that. So I wasn't seeking to achieve anything because it was not a question that I asked. And to be honest, I think the Cambridgeshire Local Government Pension Scheme is actually one of the best local government pension schemes out there because it's very well funded, and the investment shape is unusually progressive, I would say, for pension funds. So I don't personally have any concerns about this. Simply saying it was raised, the previous committee expressed a concern about it. Personally, the value of pension funds goes up, it goes down, we're in deficit, we're in surplus, millions of pounds flow in, millions of pounds flow out. But broadly speaking, I think we're in a reasonably good shape, so I'm not worried about this. So it may be, Chair, that, two of my colleagues aren't here. I suspect they would probably agree with me. It may be that this is something that we can lose from everybody's radar.
Councillor Taylor.
If I remember rightly, the discussion was around, I think it had gone up, or the risk factors for it to decline were such as the war in Ukraine and steel prices, and I think it was the volatility of it. But I think on the general, it had gone up quite well against all the background factors. So I think there was a concern about other factors that could impact it. Sorry. So, but yeah, I agree completely.
So we'll take that, sorry, Chair, we'll take that as an action off then, just for clarity. Everyone's happy with that. Thank you.
Councillor Gray?
So can I just clarify something? The second item here, which is the constitutional review, delete from future list. So I know that we've got a working group. Can I just be clear about where is the working group reporting into? Because isn't it reporting into this committee? And if it's reporting into this committee, why are we deleting it from the list? Because this is a progress report, not a one and done. This is the kick-off of it.
If I may, because I would expect you to get a regular, I would expect that to become a standing item for your committee. So therefore you would have a report each time you meet in terms of what's been happening with the working group. Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's absolutely right. So we've got the times programmed in for that first meeting of that group, and also time programmed in actually tomorrow morning with ADSO, just to provide that bit of external support to the process. But I think that regular update will be important, just to have that point of transparency and oversight.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 12, the exclusion of press and the public. This is for the press and public to be excluded from the meeting due to the business being transacted contains exempt information. I am happy to propose this. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second, thank you.
And a show of hands? Yeah, lovely, that's carried.
I'm just checking.
Yeah, we will just